It is December 29, 2024, in Jacobsdal, Free State. Two young women walk home from town, talking and laughing, unaware they are being followed. Willemina Koelie Magada, 21 years old, doesn't know that her 41-year-old boyfriend has been tracking her movements, planning his attack. Her friend Lofdania doesn't know she's about to witness a murder and become a target herself. In minutes, Willemina will be stabbed repeatedly in the neck, head, and arms. Lofdania will fight back and survive. And the killer will walk to the police station and confess. This is Brick and Blood, South African Town Tales. Jacobsdal sits on the Riet River in the southwestern Free State, a small farming town of around 6,500 people. It was established in 1859 and it's known for its irrigation farming, grapes and potatoes, lucerne and groundnuts, the kind of small Free State town where everyone knows everyone, where families have farmed the same land for generations. It's a place where a 21-year-old woman named Willemina Koelie Magada should have been safe. On December the 29th, 2024, the holiday season between Christmas and New Year, when most of South Africa slows down, Willemina and her friend Lofdania decided to go into town. Maybe they needed to shop. Maybe they just wanted to get out. It should have been an ordinary outing. But Jacob Petrus Morwe, 41 years old, was watching. Court records would later reveal that he tracked these two women from home to town and back again, maintaining a distance, planning his attack with the kind of premeditation that transforms violence into calculated murder. Think about that. A 41-year-old man following a 21-year-old girlfriend and her friend through Jacobsdal streets, timing his approach, choosing his moment. This wasn't a fight that escalated. This was an ambush. Willemina and Lofdania walked back from town, probably enjoying the late December weather. They talked, they laughed, they had no idea that death was following them home. Morwe struck when they were vulnerable, probably on a quiet stretch where witnesses would be unlikely. He came at them with a knife and absolute determination to kill. Willemina took the full force of his attack. The court records detail wounds that tell a horrific story. Multiple stab wounds to her neck, multiple wounds to her head, multiple wounds to her arms. Those arm wounds are particularly haunting. They're called defensive wounds in forensic pathology. Injuries sustained when someone raises their hands and arms to protect their face and neck and vital organs from an attacker. Willemina saw the knife coming. She tried to shield herself. She fought for her life even as the blade kept stabbing. 21 years old, fighting for survival on a Jacobsdal street, while the man who claimed to love her tried to end her life. The neck wounds were fatal. When you stab someone repeatedly in the neck, you are not trying to hurt them or scare them. You are trying to kill them. The neck contains the carotid arteries that supply blood to the brain, the jugular veins that return it, the trachea that allows breathing. A knife to the neck is a weapon aimed at the most vulnerable parts of human anatomy. The head wounds added to the brutality. Multiple strikes to the head speak to rage beyond control, to a level of violence that goes beyond what's necessary to kill and enters territory of destruction, of obliterating the person you're attacking. This is what Jacob Petrus Morwe did to Willemina Koelie Magada on December 29, 2024. But Lofdania was there. She watched her friend being murdered, and she did something extraordinary. She intervened. Most people would run. Self-preservation is a powerful instinct, especially when facing someone wielding a knife with clear willingness to use it lethally. But Lofdania didn't run. She tried to stop him. She tried to save Willemina, even though it meant putting herself directly in the path of violence. Morwe attacked Lofdania too. Court records confirm she was assaulted during the incident. She took wounds. We don't know the full extent, but she required medical treatment. She could have died alongside her friend. The only reason she didn't was luck, timing, or perhaps Morwe deciding he'd accomplished his primary goal and fleeing before finishing her too. Lofdania survived, injured, traumatized, having watched her friend murdered but alive. And then Jacob Petrus Morwe did something that complicates any attempt to understand his psychology. He walked to the Jacobsdal police station and confessed. No chase, no manhunt, no attempt to flee or hide or construct an alibi. He simply walked in and told police he'd killed his girlfriend. I followed them from home to town, he confessed. I stabbed Willemina to death. For Detective Warrant Officer Martin Coetzee of Jacobsdal Detective Services, this confession made some aspects of the case straightforward. When suspects confess, you don't need to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt through circumstantial evidence. You have admission from the perpetrator's own mouth. But confession doesn't mean the investigation stops. Coetzee still needed to build a prosecutable case that would withstand legal scrutiny and result in a sentence matching the crime's severity. Crime scene teams were dispatched immediately to where Willemina died. They photographed everything: the body's position, blood spatter patterns that would reveal the attacks, dynamics, and evidence the killer had left behind. In violent stabbings, crime scenes tell stories through physical evidence: dropped weapons, blood trails, signs of struggle. They documented Willemina's wounds with clinical precision. Each stab wound was measured, photographed, catalogued. The defense wounds on her arms, the fatal wounds to her neck, the brutal wounds to her head. Every injury became evidence that would be presented in court. Physical testimony to the violence Morwe had inflicted. Medical examiners performed the autopsy. They determined which wounds were inflicted first, which were fatal, how long Willemina would have survived after the initial injuries. The autopsy report would provide the medical evidence needed to charge Morwe with murder rather than manslaughter, to prove he intended to kill rather than merely injure. Lofdania received medical treatment for her injuries. Hospital records documenting her wounds became evidence as well, proving Morwe hadn't just killed Willemina, but had attacked a witness who tried to intervene. This demonstrated his willingness to harm anyone who interfered with his violence. As Lofdania healed physically, investigators prepared her for the role she would play as eyewitness. She would need to testify about what she saw, about trying to save Willemina, about being attacked herself. Her testimony would corroborate Morwe's confession and provide details he might omit or misrepresent. The investigation revealed details about the relationship between Willemina and Morwe. The 20-year age gap, she was 21, he was 41, meant they were at completely different life stages. She was just beginning adult independence. He had 2 decades more experience, more power in any relationship dynamic. Did family members know about the relationship? Had there been previous incidents of violence or controlling behavior? Had Willemina tried to end the relationship, triggering Morwe's decision to kill her rather than allow her to leave? These questions matter for understanding motive, but court records don't reveal those intimate details. What the court records reveal is the premeditation. Morwe followed Willemina and Lofdania from home to town. He tracked their movements. He planned when to strike. This wasn't spontaneous violence. It was calculated murder executed when victims were most vulnerable. The case moved to the Free State High Court, the regional system handling serious crimes requiring substantial sentences. Morwe was charged with murder for killing Willemina and attempted murder for attacking Lofdania. His confession meant the trial focused primarily on sentencing rather than establishing guilt. The prosecution presented evidence of premeditation, brutality, the vulnerability of the victims, the age and power imbalance. They argued for a sentence reflecting the severity of taking a 21-year-old woman's life through stabbing that showed clear intent to kill. Defense attorneys would have looked for mitigating factors. The confession itself might not qualify, taking responsibility without forcing the state through lengthy trial. But confessions made immediately after crimes carry limited weight when evidence would have secured conviction anyway. South African sentencing law requires courts to balance aggravating and mitigating factors. In Morwe's case, the aggravating factors overwhelmed any possible mitigation. He planned the attack. He followed his victims. He stabbed Willemina multiple times in the most vulnerable areas of her body. He attacked Lofdania when she tried to intervene. He destroyed a young life that deserved decades more. On August 28, 2025, 8 months after Willemina's murder, the Free State High Court delivered its judgment. Jacob Petrus Morwe would serve 23 years for murder and 5 years for attempted murder. The court ordered concurrent sentences, meaning the effective 23-year imprisonment term. The court also declared Morwe automatically unfit to possess a firearm, which is a standard provision for violent crime convictions. Not that it matters, because he used a knife to kill Willemina, proving that murder requires intent more than a weapon type. 23 years. Morwe is 41, meaning he'll be 64 at release if he serves his full term. Willemina would have been 44. She could have built a career, traveled, fallen in love with someone who treated her with respect, maybe had children, lived a full life with decades stretching ahead. Instead, she's buried in Jacobsdal. Her life ended at 21 because Jacob Petrus Morwe decided his rage mattered more than her existence. Detective Warrant Officer Coetzee's diligent work ensured justice was served. The Free State Provincial Commissioner recognized his efforts publicly, noting that thorough investigation transformed confessions into conviction with significant prison time. In a justice system often criticized for delayed trials and inadequate sentences, this case moved efficiently from crime to conviction. But speed doesn't erase loss. A 23-year sentence doesn't resurrect the dead. Willemina's family still grieves. Lofdania still carries physical and psychological scars from trying to save her friend. And somewhere in Jacobsdal, people walk past the street where Willemina died, remembering the day violence shattered their small town's peace. The 20-year age gap between Willemina and Morwe tells part of this story. At 21, she was just beginning adult life. At 41, he had 2 decades more life experience. The premeditated nature of her murder, Morwe following her from home to town and back before striking, shows this wasn't a sudden act but a planned ambush. He tracked her movements, chose his moment, waited for vulnerability. Small towns like Jacobsdal present specific challenges in cases of domestic violence. Everyone knows everyone, making it difficult to leave relationships without community awareness. Geographic isolation means there's fewer support services, there's longer distances to reach help. When violence erupts in public spaces, as it did when Willemina and Lofdania walked home, witnesses may be scarce and escape routes limited. The attack occurred on a street in daylight or early evening, suggesting Morwe felt confident enough to strike in a semi-public space. That confidence speaks to how domestic abusers often escalate from private violence to public acts when they believe they've lost control over their victims. Willemina Koelie Magada was 21 years old when Jacob Petrus Morwe murdered her on a Jacobsdal street. She should have made it home that December day. She should have celebrated New Year's Eve 3 days later. She should have decades ahead of her to live, love, build a life on her own terms. Instead, she died fighting for survival, her arms raised to defend herself against a man who claimed to love her. The defensive wounds on her arms tell a story of courage in her final moments. She didn't surrender. She fought back even as the knife kept coming. Lofdania's intervention represents something equally important. She could have run. Most people would have. But she stayed and fought to protect her friend, taking wounds that could have killed her. Her survival means Willemina's story could be told fully, that justice could be served with eyewitness testimony, supporting Morwe's confession. Detective Warrant Officer Martin Coetzee's thorough investigation ensured that confession translated into conviction. In 8 months, this case moved from crime scene to sentencing. Justice served with the speed that victims' families rarely see. His work honored Willemina by building a case so solid that Morwe will spend 23 years in prison. The swift justice matters. The 23-year sentence matters. But what matters most is remembering Willemina as a 21-year-old woman whose life had value, whose death wasn't inevitable, whose murder was a choice made by one man who destroyed what he claimed to love. Jacobsdal streets still carry the memory of December 29, 2024, when Willemina Koelie Magada walked home from town and never arrived. Jacob Petrus Morwe sits in prison, serving 23 years for her murder. Lofdania lives with scars that remind her of the friend she tried to save and the violence she survived. Willemina was 21. She loved life enough to fight for it in her final moments. She had a friend loyal enough to risk death protecting her. She deserved decades more than she got. If this story moved you, please share it. Subscribe to Brick and Blood on YouTube and follow us on your podcast platform. Every share keeps Willemina's memory alive. Every subscription supports storytelling that honors victims rather than sensationalizing their deaths. Hit the like button, leave a comment, tell us which South African town we should cover next. These stories matter. Your attention honors those who can no longer speak for themselves. Thank you for listening. Walk softly, listen deeply, and remember, every wall has a story.